All right, now we're going to talk about ancient astronomers, meaning these are the first people that we know that have written record of studying astronomy, as opposed to the ancient sites where we just see it in the buildings and their alignment of buildings. These people left us written records. The first one we're going to talk about is Aristotle. In Aristotle, hopefully you've come across Aristotle in your historical studies. Aristotle lived from 384 to 322 BCE. He was a Greek, and if you remember, hopefully from your history, there were what they call the three major Greek philosophers or scientists. They have many other ones, but it started out with Socrates, who had a student named Plato, and Plato's student was Aristotle. They were all very different in their ways, but Aristotle was the one that was very into nature and trying to understand and explain why the world was the way it was. And that's why the Greeks came in. That was the difference between them and the other cultures and cultures that came before them. Because most of the other cultures would say, oh, why does the sun go across the sky? Oh, it's because the god Ra takes a boat across the sky every day, is what the Egyptian would say. And the Greeks were the first ones to not go to saying, oh, the gods do this, but they were trying to get an explanation. They're trying to get an explanation for it by observing it, just watching it and saying, okay, what can we figure out just by observing different things? So Aristotle did that, and Aristotle wrote some fabulous stuff. And he was so influential that really it wasn't until the Renaissance, which was about the 1500s, up until then, from 300 BC till 1500s, what Aristotle said kind of became accepted as being true without anybody ever even questioning it. Just because Aristotle said it, he became that important. In fact, lots of things got credited to Aristotle, which he never did, but when you get that big, anything that happened, you start getting credit for it. But Aristotle wrote 3 massive volumes on everything from biology, how life works, to rocks, to astronomy, to all kinds of things. We are missing one of those volumes. We have volume 1 and volume 3. If you ever found Aristotle volume 2, you would be filthy rich, because that one book would be worth so much to historians, it would be amazing. But nobody's ever found it. We think it was gone. We know it was in the Library of Alexandria, but if you know your history, the Library of Alexandria, which had several million scrolls, was trying to collect all the information of the world. They sent people out to these places like Persia and all over, and whenever they found any scroll of interest, they would make a copy of it and send it back to Alexandria, Egypt, and they would then put it in this museum. The idea was they wanted to collect all the knowledge of the world, which is a great idea, but then it was burned and they lost so much of it. It was probably the greatest tragedy, scientific tragedy that ever happened to humankind, was the loss of a lot of that knowledge. Now, some of it we found in other places, and a lot of it got reconstructed from having other scrolls in different places, but so much of it was lost at that time. But let's talk about the few things that Aristotle did with astronomy. First of all, first thing he did, he deduced, did I spell that right? The moon was a sphere. He's like, well, the moon's a sphere because we see phases. Think about it. They knew that the moon was lit up by the sun. Here's the Earth, and we talked about moon phases. And what we see when it's here is we see half a moon, right? And that's because the moon is a sphere. But let's say the moon was a flat circular plate, like a frisbee. Now what would happen is, as it went around, it always faces the Earth, and they knew that, it always faces the same way, is that sunlight would light up the whole side. So this would be full moon, this would be full moon, and then over here, sunlight would light up the back and you wouldn't see it all, so you would only have 2 phases that would be new and full. For you to have a crescent or a gibbous phase, any phase in between those, between new and full, the moon has to be a sphere. So the moon actually had to be a spherical object. And if the moon is a sphere, he thought, well, maybe the Earth is a sphere too. Because the common notion was that the Earth was flat at that time, 300 BC. And so they thought, okay, if the moon was a sphere, or Aristotle did, is there any way we can deduce if the Earth is a sphere? And Aristotle realized that through observation you could figure this out. He actually had 3 arguments. We're only going to put down 2 of them because one of them was ridiculous. But the first argument was, and we talked about this, that during a lunar eclipse, the Earth always casts a curved shadow. And there is only one shape that always casts a curved shadow. If you had a disk again, and the Earth was a flat disk, it would cast a curved shadow when it's facing like this. So you can imagine here's the sun. And if the Earth is like this, it's a disk, a flat disk, then it would cast a curved shadow on the moon because you're seeing the disk. But then when the Earth is rotated, like at sunset, then you would get a nice straight line shadow as the sunlight went past the Earth. So the only shape that always casts a curved shadow is if you have a ball, a spherical shape. A spherical shape, no matter what direction you hit the light on it, will always cast a curved shadow. Aristotle realized that. He realized the Earth must be a sphere. Second argument. As you travel north and south on the Earth, you see different stars. All right, so let's think about what that means. So over here, if the Earth is flat, this is north, this is south, here's our astronomer Herb right here, you see stars out here, right? And Herb could see all those stars. But as you travel to the south over here, you would see the same exact stars. But if the Earth is round, then as Herb travels south, as he gets over here, he would only see these stars. He would see this star, which couldn't be seen from there, and he would see less of those stars up there. And vice versa, as he traveled this way, he would see different stars. And they knew as they traveled north and south, they saw different stars, and the stars would get higher and lower in the sky, the stuff you already learned about the celestial sphere. And that can only be the case if you're on a curved Earth. Okay. Now he also came up with a third reason. The third reason is, and the reason we don't write it down because it was totally wrong, but he realized that, you remember, he was Greek. Aristotle was Greek, lived in Greece. So in Africa, there were elephants. And in India, there were elephants. Okay. So he thought, oh, the Earth must be a sphere because if there's elephants in Africa, down here, and elephants in India, over here, they can't walk across from Africa to India. You got the Red Sea and you got the Arabian Desert. There's no way you can walk across there. So he thought, oh, the elephants must be walking around the back of the Earth to get from Africa to India. Totally wrong. What we realize now is, yes, there are 2 sets of elephants. There's the African elephant and there's the Indian elephant. They're related, but they were separated some long time ago in the past, and they're actually 2 different species of elephant. All right. So that was his argument for the Earth being a sphere. And he was totally right that the Earth's spherical. Now, I want to clear up a misconception, a common misconception. A lot of people say when they're taught in their grade school classes that when Columbus was trying to sail for the New World, that they thought he would sail off the edge of the Earth. That is totally wrong. Columbus knew, and all the learned people by that time knew the earth was spherical. They knew that they would not sail off the edge. Maybe some sailors thought that were uneducated, but all of them knew that. That was not the question. The question was, when Columbus tried to convince Spain and Portugal to give him money to sail, from here, he wanted to sail all the way to China, over here. And they knew how far that was because people had gone this way by this time. It was a long way. He said, well, I'm going to just sail around this way. And the problem was, and the most learned scholars at the time realized that to get from here, from Spain, all the way to China would take months and months and months, way longer than you go. He could go about 3 months with his supplies before he had to resupply it, or he would run out of supplies. And they were like, no, the earth is way too big, it won't make it. So the question wasn't if the earth was round, the question was how big the earth was. Because it wasn't clear how big the earth was. And Columbus claimed it was a small earth that he could actually make it. He was totally wrong. But sometimes you just get really lucky. He ran into a whole continent in between. He ran into the Caribbean. He landed in all these islands in here. Took 3 or 4 different trips back and forth. All right. So we aren't exactly sure what Aristotle looked like. But this is a very famous painting here. This is by Raphael, painted in the Renaissance era, 1500 era. And he put Aristotle and Plato, and Socrates is here too. In fact, it's a huge wall painting of the great Greek philosophers of the time. And I just pulled out the ones with Aristotle and Plato. Do we understand exactly what Aristotle looked like? No, we're not exactly sure what he looks like. This is Raphael's interpretation of what he looked like, and Plato as well. All right. And this led to something else. I'm not done with Aristotle yet. Let me keep going here.